The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Excelsior Grand Hotel in Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Grace Sullivan, 32 years old with auburn hair neatly tucked beneath her chambermaid's cap, moved efficiently between the lobby's ornate columns, polishing the brass fixtures until they gleamed. She kept her eyes downcast, as Manager Harriman had instructed all housekeeping staff, be invisible, be silent, be efficient. 6 years of this routine had worn paths in Grace's soul. 6 years since graduating summa cum laude from St. Catherine's University with her master's degree in classical studies and ancient languages. 6 years of sending out resumes that disappeared into administrative black holes. 6 years of watching less qualified candidates secure positions at museums, universities, and cultural institutions, while her own applications were perpetually under consideration. So here she was, a master of dead languages cleaning living spaces, her extensive knowledge of Latin, ancient Greek, and Aramaic utterly useless as she scrubbed toilets and changed sheets in a 5-star hotel frequented by Washington's elite. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Sullivan!" Harriman's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. The head manager was a tall, rail-thin woman with piercing eyes that seemed to find fault in everything they surveyed. "The Jefferson Suite needs immediate attention. Ambassador Blackburn is hosting an important meeting in 30 minutes. "Yes, Miss Harriman," Grace responded, gathering her cleaning supplies. As she moved toward the service elevator, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Grace hesitated. Strict policy forbade personal calls during work hours, but the caller ID showed Father Thomas, her parish priest and the coordinator for the Ancient Text Preservation Committee at the Vatican Library. For months, she'd been volunteering her translation skills remotely, helping with obscure Latin documents too fragile to be widely distributed to scholars. The service elevator doors opened with a soft ping. Grace stepped inside, alone with her dilemma. Father Thomas never called during work hours unless it was urgent. After a moment of deliberation, she answered in a whisper, "Hello, Father." "Grace, gratias Deo, I've been trying to reach you." Father Thomas's voice was breathless with excitement. "The Cardinal's office called. They found it, the lost manuscript of St. Augustine we've been searching for." Grace's heart leapt. "Truly? The complete text?" "Yes, listen, I need your help with the preliminary translation immediately. The preservation team needs guidance on how to proceed with the more fragile sections." Without thinking, Grace responded in fluent ecclesiastical Latin, the words flowing naturally after years of study and practice. "Quam mirabilis, possum auxilium praebere cum transcriptione, dic mihi de conditione manuscripti." As she spoke, describing her availability to assist with the translation and inquiring about the manuscript's condition, the elevator stopped at the mezzanine level. The doors slid open to reveal a tall man in an impeccable charcoal suit, his silver-streaked dark hair perfectly combed, his face bearing the confident expression of someone accustomed to being in charge. Behind him stood Miss Harriman and Nathan Blackburn, the renowned diplomat, whose name Grace recognized from countless news articles about international peace negotiations. Grace froze mid-sentence, suddenly aware of her breach of protocol. Ambassador Blackburn was staring at her with undisguised surprise, while Miss Harriman's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I'll call you back, Father," Grace whispered, ending the call as the three stepped into the elevator. The ride to the top floor proceeded in uncomfortable silence. When the doors opened again, Miss Harriman's clipped voice broke the tension. "Sullivan, my office. Immediately after you finish the Jefferson Suite." "Yes, Miss Harriman," Grace responded, her stomach knotting with anxiety. As she exited, she felt Ambassador Blackburn's eyes following her, his expression thoughtful. 3 hours later, Grace sat rigidly in front of Miss Harriman's desk, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. 6 years with this hotel, Sullivan, and you know our policies regarding personal calls. Miss Harriman began, her voice cold with disapproval. "Especially in the presence of our most distinguished guests." "I apologize, Miss Harriman. It was Father Thomas from my church." "I don't care if it was the Pope himself," Harriman interrupted. "Rules are rules. And what was that gibberish you were speaking?" "Latin, Miss Harriman. Classical and ecclesiastical Latin." Harriman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Latin? Like the dead language?" "Yes, ma'am. I have a master's degree in classical studies and your educational background is irrelevant to your position here, Sullivan." Harriman cut her off again. "What matters is your adherence to our standards. I'm assigning you to the convention center bathrooms for the next month. Perhaps that will help you remember the importance of protocol." Grace's chest tightened. The convention center assignment was notorious endless hours cleaning facilities used by hundreds of conference attendees, with none of the tips or breaks afforded to room attendants. It was Harriman's favorite punishment. "You're dismissed," Harriman concluded, already turning her attention to paperwork on her desk. As Grace left the office, she fought against the bitter tide rising within her. "Lord, help me with this resentment," she prayed silently. "I know you have a purpose for me, even if I can't see it." That evening, Grace's small apartment felt especially empty. Her roommate Rachel, a nurse working night shifts, had already left for the hospital. Grace sat at her modest desk, surrounded by the books that represented her true passion: ancient texts, linguistic analyses, theological commentaries. Her walls displayed her diplomas and certificates, gathering dust like her dreams. She opened her Bible to Proverbs 3:5-6, a passage that had sustained her through many disappointments. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." "I'm trying, Lord," she whispered, "but sometimes I wonder if I misunderstood your calling for my life." Her phone rang, displaying the hotel's number. With a sigh, Grace answered, expecting Harriman with additional reprimands. Instead, a male voice spoke. "Miss Sullivan, this is Jonathan Reynolds, Executive Director of the Excelsior Grand. I'd like to see you in my office tomorrow morning at 8. Grace's mouth went dry. The Executive Director. She'd never even met the man who ran the entire hotel chain's East Coast operations. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds, I'll be there," she managed to reply. "Good. And Miss Sullivan, please bring your curriculum vitae and any certification documents you might have regarding your language skills." The line went dead before she could respond. Grace spent a sleepless night, alternating between prayer and panic. By morning, she had prepared a professional portfolio containing her academic records, publications in scholarly journals, and letters of recommendation from professors and clergy who appreciated her translation work. Whatever was coming, she would face it with dignity. The executive offices occupied the penthouse floor of the hotel, an area Grace had cleaned but never visited during business hours. As she was escorted through the reception area by Reynolds's assistant, she noticed Ambassador Blackburn sitting in the waiting area, reading the Washington Post. The ambassador glanced up, recognition flashing in his eyes. Before he could speak, the assistant ushered Grace into Reynolds's office. Jonathan Reynolds was younger than Grace had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with keen eyes and an air of measured authority. He gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Miss Sullivan, thank you for coming," he began, accepting the portfolio she offered. "I understand there was an incident yesterday involving Ambassador Blackburn." Grace swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I violated protocol by taking a personal call. I accept full responsibility." Reynolds studied her for a moment. "The ambassador mentioned that he heard you speaking what appeared to be fluent Latin. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I was speaking with my parish priest about a translation project for the Vatican Library." Reynolds opened her portfolio, eyebrows rising as he scanned her credentials. "Masters in Classical Studies. Proficiency in 6 ancient languages. Published articles on theological text preservation. And you're cleaning hotel rooms." The question hung in the air between them. I've applied for positions more aligned with my education, Mr. Reynolds, Grace replied carefully, including 3 times to the Cultural Programs Department of this hotel. I never received a response. Reynolds frowned. Our Cultural Programs Department regularly hosts scholarly events and collaborates with embassies and museums. Your qualifications would be highly relevant. He pressed an intercom button. Barbara, please ask Mr. Whitfield to join us immediately. While they waited, Reynolds continued reviewing Grace's portfolio. You've been with us 6 years, yet I'm only learning of your qualifications now. That's concerning. The door opened to admit a silver-haired man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and a wary expression. You wanted to see me, Jonathan? Yes, Gerald. This is Grace Sullivan, one of our housekeeping staff. She speaks 6 ancient languages, including Latin and Greek, has a master's degree from St. Catherine's, and has been working with the Vatican on document preservation. She's applied to your department 3 times. Gerald Whitfield's expression remained neutral, though his eyes narrowed slightly. I don't recall seeing her applications. That's strange, Reynolds replied, because I just checked our HR database. All 3 applications are there, along with rejections citing insufficient qualifications, rejections sent from your account. The tension in the room thickened perceptibly. We must have determined that her experience wasn't the right fit for our needs, Whitfield replied smoothly. That's what I'd like to discuss, Reynolds countered, his voice taking on an edge. Because as luck would have it, Ambassador Blackburn came to me this morning with an unusual request. The International Peace Institute is hosting a symposium here next week on religious texts and their influence on diplomatic relations throughout history. Their Latin expert had to withdraw due to illness. The ambassador was quite impressed by Miss Sullivan's fluency and wondered if she might be available to assist. Whitfield's face paled slightly. Jonathan, we can't possibly put a housekeeper in front of international scholars. We have a reputation to maintain. Grace flinched at his dismissive tone, but kept her expression composed. Reynolds' gaze hardened. Gerald, I've been reviewing the cultural program's expenditures for the past year. We've paid substantial consulting fees to external language experts, including $20,000 last quarter to Academica Consulting, a company registered to your son-in-law. Yet we have someone with superior qualifications already on our payroll, cleaning toilets. The silence that followed was deafening. I believe I should consult with legal before continuing this conversation, Whitfield said finally, his voice tight. An excellent idea, Reynolds agreed. Please do that. I've already scheduled a meeting with them for this afternoon. You're dismissed for now. After Whitfield left, Reynolds turned back to Grace. Miss Sullivan, I owe you an apology on behalf of the Excelsior Grand. It appears we've failed to recognize your talents. Grace sat stunned, struggling to process the rapid turn of events. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I'd like to offer you a temporary position as special cultural consultant for the upcoming symposium, with appropriate compensation for your expertise. After that, we can discuss a permanent role that better suits your qualifications. I don't know what to say, Grace managed, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Say yes, came a voice from the doorway. Ambassador Blackburn stood there, a small smile playing on his lips. I apologize for interrupting, but I couldn't help overhearing. Miss Sullivan, your assistance would be invaluable to our symposium. The ambassador has been quite insistent about meeting you properly, Reynolds explained. Grace looked between the 2 men, a strange sensation washing over her, the feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. Yes, she said finally. I would be honored to help with the symposium. Excellent, Ambassador Blackburn replied. Perhaps you could join me for lunch to discuss the details? There's a particular passage from Cicero's De Officiis that's central to our opening session, and your perspective would be most welcome. As they left Reynolds' office together, Grace sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. The path ahead was uncertain, but she felt a spark of hope that had been absent for too long. The hotel restaurant's maitre d' nearly tripped over himself accommodating Ambassador Blackburn, leading them to a private table in an alcove overlooking the hotel's courtyard garden. Grace felt acutely aware of her plain dress and practical shoes. She'd come prepared for a disciplinary meeting, not lunch with an international diplomat. "Please, be comfortable," Blackburn said, noticing her discomfort. "I requested privacy because I value substantive conversation, not because I'm concerned about appearances." Once they'd ordered, Blackburn regarded her with genuine interest. "Miss Sullivan, I must confess my surprise yesterday. Few people in diplomatic circles can speak Latin with such fluency, much less hotel staff. Your accent is impeccable, reminiscent of the Vatican scholarly tradition." "Thank you, Ambassador. I've had the privilege of working with several Vatican scholars on translation projects. Please, call me Nathan, and may I call you Grace?" She nodded, still slightly overwhelmed by the situation. "Grace," he continued, "I'm curious about your story. How does someone with your obvious intellect and education end up in housekeeping?" The question was asked without condescension, but with genuine curiosity. Grace sighed. The simple answer: the economic recession hit just as I finished my master's program. Academic positions dried up, museums implemented hiring freezes, and my specialized knowledge suddenly seemed impractical. I took the housekeeping job as a temporary measure that became permanent. "And the more complex answer?" Nathan prompted gently. Grace hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I believe in God's purpose, even when I don't understand it. I've spent 6 years cleaning rooms while praying for direction, trusting that my education and passion weren't wasted. Some days that's harder to believe than others." Nathan's expression was thoughtful. "I respect your faith, though I don't share it. My background is in rationalism and empirical evidence, what some might call agnosticism. I find religious texts fascinating as historical and cultural documents, but I've never felt the personal connection believers describe. Yet you're organizing a symposium on religious texts and diplomacy," Grace observed, "because they've shaped human history, regardless of whether one believes in their divine origin," Nathan replied. "The Latin passage I mentioned, Cicero's exploration of moral duties, influenced both religious and secular ethical frameworks for centuries. Whether inspired by God or human wisdom, such ideas transcend their origins." Their conversation flowed easily through lunch, ranging from ancient languages to ethical philosophy. Grace found herself intellectually engaged in a way she hadn't experienced in years. "Your perspective would be invaluable at our symposium," Nathan said as they finished their meal. "We have secular scholars and religious authorities, but few who can bridge both worlds with your combination of academic rigor and personal faith." "I appreciate your confidence, but I should be honest," Grace replied. "My publications are modest, and my name carries no weight in academic circles." "Ideas should stand on their merit, not the status of who presents them," Nathan countered. "Besides, your story itself illustrates our symposium's theme, how ancient wisdom speaks to contemporary challenges across cultural and belief divides." As they parted ways, Nathan handed her a folder. "The symposium materials. We begin in 4 days. I've requested that Mr. Reynolds give you time to prepare." "Thank you for this opportunity," Grace said sincerely. Nathan smiled. "Sometimes the right person appears precisely when needed, though I suspect you might attribute that to divine intervention rather than coincidence." "I might," Grace agreed with a small smile. The next morning, Grace reported to the Cultural Programs Department instead of housekeeping. The department occupied a spacious area on the mezzanine level, with comfortable workstations and walls adorned with artwork from various cultural exhibitions. Barbara Chen, Reynolds' assistant, introduced her to the team and showed her to a temporary office with a view of the National Mall. "Mr. Reynolds asked me to ensure you have everything you need," Barbara explained. "He's quite determined to make amends for the oversight regarding your qualifications." It's all happening so quickly, Grace admitted, setting her modest purse on the desk that was now hers. Between us, Barbara confided, there's been a serious shake-up. Mr. Whitfield has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and Miss Harriman is being closely monitored. It seems your situation exposed broader issues. After Barbara left, Grace sat at her new desk, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. Just yesterday, she'd been facing punishment duty cleaning convention center bathrooms. Now, she was preparing to participate in an international symposium. Her phone rang. Father Thomas again. "Grace, I've been trying to reach you. Is everything all right? You never called back yesterday." "Father, you won't believe what's happened," she began, then related the extraordinary turn of events. "God works in mysterious ways," Father Thomas said when she finished. "Perhaps all these years of waiting had a purpose after all." "Perhaps," Grace agreed, "though I admit I've struggled with resentment. Why would God give me these abilities only to have them go unused for so long?" "Were they truly unused?" Father Thomas challenged gently. "How many ancient texts have you helped preserve through your volunteer work? How many translations have benefited from your expertise? Not all meaningful work happens in prestigious positions." Grace considered his words. "You're right, of course. I'm ashamed of my impatience." "Don't be. You're human. Even Jesus in the garden asked if the cup might pass from him. What matters is that despite your frustration, you remained faithful." After ending the call, Grace turned her attention to the symposium materials. The event would bring together diplomats, religious leaders, and scholars to explore how ancient wisdom might inform modern conflict resolution. The theme resonated deeply with her, bridging her academic interests and spiritual convictions. As she reviewed the schedule, a knock at her door interrupted her concentration. Gerald Whitfield stood in the doorway, his expression taut with suppressed anger. "Miss Sullivan," he said, his voice coldly polite, "I wanted to personally welcome you to the department." Grace tensed, hearing the insincerity in his tone. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. I understand you're on administrative leave." "A temporary misunderstanding," he replied, stepping uninvited into her office and closing the door. "One that I'm sure we can resolve like reasonable people." "I'm not sure what you mean," Grace said cautiously. Whitfield's facade of politeness slipped. "Let's be direct. You've caused considerable trouble with your accusations. Reynolds is overreacting to an administrative oversight." "I made no accusations, Mr. Whitfield. I simply stated facts when asked directly." "Facts without context," he countered. "Do you know how many applications we receive? Hundreds, many from individuals with impressive credentials. Yet none with my specific qualifications when you needed them," Grace observed. "That seems statistically unlikely." Whitfield's expression hardened. "I've built this department from nothing over 15 years. I've established relationships with every major cultural institution in Washington. Do you really think you can step in and succeed without those connections?" The implied threat hung in the air between them. "I don't expect to replace you, Mr. Whitfield," Grace replied evenly. "I'm simply trying to use my God-given talents to make a positive contribution." "God-given talents," he repeated with a slight sneer. "Perhaps in your church, that sentiment carries weight. In professional circles, we value experience and proven results." Grace felt a familiar spark of indignation, but remembered her morning prayers for humility and patience. "Experience comes with opportunity, Mr. Whitfield, something that was systematically denied to me. You'd be wise to withdraw from this symposium," Whitfield said, his voice lowering. "You're unprepared for the academic rigor it demands. Your participation would reflect poorly on this hotel." Grace met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate your concern, but Ambassador Blackburn seems confident in my abilities." "Blackburn is a diplomat, not a scholar. He's merely being polite." "Then I'll let my work speak for itself," Grace replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have preparation to complete." Whitfield lingered a moment longer, then left without another word. Grace released a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Was he right? Was she unprepared for this level of academic discourse? Doubt crept in, an unwelcome companion she'd fought throughout her years of professional disappointment. She opened her Bible app on her phone, seeking comfort. Her eyes fell on Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Grace closed her eyes, centering herself in prayer. Lord, I know you didn't bring me this far to abandon me now. Give me the strength and wisdom I need for this task. With renewed determination, she returned to her preparation. The symposium's opening reception was held 3 days later in the hotel's grand ballroom. Grace stood nervously at its periphery, wearing a modest blue dress purchased specifically for the occasion, her first new professional attire in years. The room buzzed with conversation as diplomats, religious leaders, and scholars from around the world mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Grace recognized several prominent academics whose works she had studied, feeling simultaneously thrilled and intimidated by their presence. "There you are!" Nathan's voice came from behind her. He approached with two people, a distinguished older man in clerical attire and a woman in her 50s with an air of academic authority. "Grace, I'd like you to meet Cardinal Rossi from the Vatican and Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery from Harvard Divinity School. They're both eager to meet you." "Miss Sullivan," Cardinal Rossi said warmly in Italian-accented English, "Ambassador Blackburn tells me you've been assisting with Vatican manuscript preservation. Which texts have you worked on?" Grace responded in perfect ecclesiastical Latin, describing several of the more significant documents she'd helped translate. The cardinal's eyebrows rose in appreciation, and he continued the conversation in Latin, discussing nuances of translation that would have been cumbersome in English. Dr. Montgomery observed their exchange with professional interest. "Your command of Latin is impressive, Miss Sullivan. Few modern scholars achieve that level of fluency. Nathan mentioned you might have insights on the Ciceronian ethics passage for tomorrow's session. I've prepared some thoughts on how Cicero's concept of moral duties parallels and diverges from early Christian ethics," Grace confirmed, "particularly regarding duties to community versus universal humanity." "I look forward to hearing them," Dr. Montgomery replied with genuine interest. As the evening progressed, Grace found herself engaged in substantive conversations with several symposium participants. Her initial nervousness faded as she realized her years of independent study and translation work had kept her knowledge current, despite her absence from formal academic settings. Across the room, she noticed Gerald Whitfield watching her, his expression darkening as he observed the respect with which the other scholars treated her. Despite his administrative leave, he had apparently secured an invitation to the reception. Later, as Grace stepped out to the terrace for a moment of quiet, Nathan joined her. "You're making quite an impression," he observed. "Cardinal Rossi asked if you might be available for a more extensive Vatican project after the symposium." Grace looked at him in surprise. "Truly? That would be a dream opportunity." "You seem shocked by your own success," Nathan noted. "Why is that?" Grace considered the question. "For 6 years, I've been told in various ways that my knowledge and abilities weren't valuable enough. After a while, you start to believe it. A common human vulnerability," Nathan replied thoughtfully. "We internalize external judgments, especially negative ones. It's something I've observed across cultures in my diplomatic work. My faith teaches that our worth comes from God, not human evaluation," Grace said. "But living that truth is harder than acknowledging it intellectually." "An interesting paradox in religious belief," Nathan observed, "the gap between intellectual assent and lived experience." "Faith isn't just intellectual assent," Grace replied. "It's a relationship that shapes how we understand ourselves and the world. When I struggle with doubt or insecurity, I'm not just questioning an idea, but feeling distant from someone I trust. Nathan's expression was thoughtful. I've never understood faith that way. To me, religion has always seemed like a collection of historical assertions and ethical guidelines, interesting anthropologically, but not personally compelling. Yet you've dedicated your career to building bridges across cultural and religious differences, Grace pointed out, because those differences shape world events, regardless of their metaphysical validity, Nathan replied. Understanding religious perspectives is essential to effective diplomacy, even if one doesn't share the beliefs. Their conversation was interrupted by Barbara Chen, who approached with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's an urgent situation, Miss Sullivan. Someone from housekeeping is asking for you, Esther Johnson. She says it's an emergency regarding your former colleagues. Grace excused herself and followed Barbara to the lobby, where Esther waited, still in her housekeeping uniform and clearly distressed. Grace, thank God, Esther said, grasping her hands. It's horrible. Miss Harriman called an emergency staff meeting after finding out about your new position. She's cutting everyone's hours, whoever supported you, claiming budget constraints. Maria might lose her apartment, and David's wife just had a baby. Grace felt sick. Her moment of professional recognition was causing hardship for those she cared about. Where is Miss Harriman now? In her office, revising the schedule. Grace, people are terrified. Some have worked here for decades. Grace squeezed Esther's hands reassuringly. I'll handle this. Tell everyone not to worry. After Esther left, Grace stood in the lobby, conflicted. Confronting Harriman could jeopardize her new position before it was secure. Doing nothing would abandon her friends to unjust treatment. Trouble? Nathan had followed her and caught the end of the conversation. Grace briefly explained the situation. A classic intimidation tactic, Nathan observed. Harriman is punishing your allies to isolate you and demonstrate power. I've seen similar tactics in authoritarian regimes. I need to stop it, Grace said firmly. I'll come with you, Nathan offered, as a hotel guest concerned about staff welfare. Together, they descended to the basement level where the administrative offices for housekeeping were located. The contrast with the luxurious upper floors was stark fluorescent lighting, utilitarian furniture, walls in need of fresh paint. Miss Harriman looked up in surprise as they entered her office. Miss Sullivan, this area is off-limits to... She stopped abruptly upon recognizing Nathan. Ambassador Blackburn, how may I assist you? I understand there are concerning changes to staff scheduling, Nathan replied smoothly. As a frequent guest interested in ethical business practices, I'm naturally concerned. Harriman's expression tightened. I'm simply adjusting hours to meet budget requirements, standard administrative procedure. Targeting specific employees who supported me is harassment, not budget management, Grace stated firmly. These are good people with families to support. I don't know what you're implying, Harriman replied coldly, but I suggest you remember your place. Your temporary assignment doesn't give you authority over hotel operations. No, but my position does, came Jonathan Reynolds' voice from the doorway. He entered, his expression severe. Barbara informed me of the situation. Miss Harriman, I reviewed the schedule changes you submitted. The pattern is unmistakable and completely unacceptable. Sir, I was merely optimizing staff allocation based on... Save it, Reynolds interrupted. This vindictive behavior confirms concerns raised during our internal review. Security will escort you to HR to process your termination. Harriman's face drained of color. Termination? You can't be serious. I've managed this department for 12 years and apparently fostered a culture of discrimination and retaliation throughout that time, Reynolds replied. We've received 7 separate complaints since opening our investigation. Your actions tonight were simply the final evidence we needed. As security arrived to escort a stunned Harriman away, Reynolds turned to Grace and Nathan. I apologize for this disruption to your evening. Rest assured, the schedule will be restored immediately. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, Grace said sincerely. "These staff members are like family to me." Reynolds nodded. "We'll be implementing significant changes to ensure this doesn't happen again. Now please, return to your reception. This matter is well in hand." As they walked back toward the elevator, Nathan gave Grace a thoughtful look. "You risked your new position to help your former colleagues. That was admirably principled." Grace shook her head. "It wasn't calculation. They're my friends. Many of them supported me through difficult times. I couldn't abandon them." "A practical application of your faith?" Nathan suggested. "I suppose so. Love your neighbor as yourself isn't just a nice saying. It's meant to guide actual decisions." The elevator doors opened, revealing Gerald Whitfield. His eyes narrowed as he saw them together. "Ambassador," he acknowledged stiffly, then turned to Grace. "I understand you're presenting in tomorrow's morning session, a significant responsibility for someone so new to professional academia." "Miss Sullivan is more than prepared," Nathan replied before Grace could respond. "Her analysis of Ciceronian ethics has already impressed several senior scholars." Whitfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We shall see. First impressions in reception conversations are quite different from formal scholarly presentations." After he departed, Nathan sighed. "Office politics exists in every organization, I suppose, but his behavior seems particularly pointed." "He sees me as a threat," Grace replied, "not just to his position, but to his entire system of operation. If I succeed, it challenges the justifications he's used for years to maintain his power." Nathan looked at her with newfound respect. "That's quite an insightful analysis. You understand power dynamics well for someone who's been denied institutional authority." "Observing from the margins can provide clarity," Grace said simply. "When you're invisible to those in power, you see how they operate without their public facades." The next morning, Grace woke early to review her notes for her presentation. The symposium's first formal session would focus on classical ethical frameworks and their influence on diplomatic traditions. Despite her preparation, butterflies fluttered in her stomach. This would be her first time presenting to an audience of this caliber. Her previous academic experience had been limited to smaller departmental seminars during her graduate studies. She dressed carefully in a conservative navy blue suit, another new purchase, and headed to the hotel's conference center. The main hall was already filling with attendees when she arrived. Nathan spotted her from across the room and approached. "Ready for your debut?" he asked with an encouraging smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," Grace replied, smoothing her jacket nervously. "You'll be magnificent," Nathan assured her. "Just speak with the same passion and insight you've shown in our conversations." The session began with opening remarks from the symposium chair, followed by a presentation from a Georgetown professor on Roman political philosophy. Grace was scheduled third, after Dr. Montgomery's discussion of religious influence on diplomatic protocols. As she listened to the presentations before hers, Grace noticed Gerald Whitfield enter the hall with another man. Older, distinguished, with an air of academic authority. They took seats near the front, and Whitfield leaned over to whisper something that made his companion glance in Grace's direction with a skeptical expression. When her turn came, Grace approached the podium with outward composure that belied her inner tension. She arranged her notes, took a deep breath, and began. "Good morning. I'm Grace Sullivan, Special Cultural Consultant for the Excelsior Grand. My presentation explores how Cicero's concept of moral duties in De Officiis influenced both secular diplomatic practice and early Christian ethical frameworks, creating a bridge between classical philosophy and religious doctrine that continues to inform international relations today." For the next 20 minutes, Grace guided her audience through a careful analysis of key passages, demonstrating how Ciceronian ethics paralleled and diverged from early Christian thought. and how these convergences created common ground for diplomatic discourse across cultural divides. She spoke with growing confidence, her years of study evident in her command of the material. When she opened the floor for questions, several hands rose immediately. The first came from the man who had entered with Whitfield. Professor Harold Winters, Yale University, he introduced himself, his tone coolly professional. Your analysis suggests significant overlap between Cicero's concept of universal humanity and Christian universalism. Yet you've overlooked the fundamental epistemological differences in how these traditions justify moral claims. Would you address this oversight? The question was clearly designed to expose weaknesses in her argument. Grace recognized the tactic from her graduate seminars. Senior academics often tested newcomers with deliberately challenging questions. Thank you for that excellent point, Professor Winters, Grace replied calmly. You're absolutely right that the epistemological foundations differ substantially. Cicero grounds moral duties in natural law and human reason, while Christian ethics ultimately appeals to divine revelation. However, my focus was on the practical convergence in diplomatic applications, where these traditions produced similar behavioral guidelines despite their different metaphysical foundations. This pragmatic overlap allowed for effective cross-cultural communication even when the underlying philosophical justifications remained distinct. Winters looked slightly taken aback by her confident response. A fair clarification, though I maintain that philosophical foundations cannot be so easily separated from practical applications. I agree they're interconnected, Grace acknowledged. In fact, that interconnection is precisely what makes these traditions valuable for modern diplomacy. They provide both practical guidelines and rich philosophical resources for addressing contemporary challenges. The exchange continued with several more questions, each progressively more collegial as the audience recognized Grace's genuine expertise. When the session concluded, several attendees approached to continue the discussion informally. Nathan found her as the crowd dispersed for the coffee break. That was exceptional, he said warmly. Even Winters was impressed, and he's notoriously difficult to please. He came prepared to challenge me, Grace observed. Whitfield's doing, no doubt, Nathan replied. I saw them conferring before the session. Winters is an old colleague of his from Yale. Academic politics, Grace sighed. Not so different from hotel management, it seems. Human nature is remarkably consistent across contexts, Nathan agreed. Speaking of which, Cardinal Rossi has asked if you might join us for lunch. He's quite interested in discussing your Vatican preservation work further. The remainder of the symposium passed in a whirlwind of presentations, discussions, and networking. Grace found herself increasingly sought out by participants, impressed with her knowledge and perspective. By the final day, she had received 3 tentative job offers, one from Cardinal Rossi for a position with the Vatican Library, another from Dr. Montgomery for a research fellowship at Harvard, and a third from the International Peace Institute as a cultural advisor. The closing reception was held in the hotel's rooftop garden, with Washington's monuments illuminated against the evening sky. Grace stood at the railing, taking a moment alone to absorb the extraordinary changes in her life. Quite a view, isn't it? Nathan joined her, offering a glass of sparkling water. In more ways than one, Grace replied, accepting the drink. A week ago I was cleaning rooms. Now I'm considering job offers from institutions I once dreamed of joining. Have you decided which to accept? Grace shook her head. Each has its appeal. The Vatican position would allow me to work directly with ancient texts. Harvard offers academic prestige and teaching opportunities. The Institute would apply my knowledge to contemporary challenges. All paths that honor your gifts, Nathan observed. A pleasant dilemma to have. What about you? Grace asked. Back to diplomatic missions after the symposium concludes. Eventually, Nathan replied. But I've requested a temporary assignment in Washington. The symposium has sparked some interesting possibilities for a new diplomatic initiative focusing on religious and cultural heritage preservation in conflict zones. Grace's interest was piqued. That sounds fascinating. I was hoping you might consider consulting on the project regardless of which position you accept, Nathan said. Your combination of linguistic expertise and cultural sensitivity would be invaluable. I'd be honored, Grace replied sincerely. As they continued their conversation, Gerald Whitfield approached, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Sullivan, Ambassador Blackburn, he greeted them. I wanted to offer my congratulations on a successful symposium before I depart. You're leaving the hotel? Grace asked, surprised by his cordial tone. I've accepted a position at American University, Whitfield replied. After recent events, it seemed an appropriate time for a change. I wish you well in your new role, Grace said sincerely. Whitfield hesitated, then continued with apparent difficulty. I also owe you an apology, Miss Sullivan. My treatment of your applications was professionally indefensible. The symposium has demonstrated that my assessment of your qualifications was not merely incorrect, but prejudiced. The admission clearly cost him considerable pride. Thank you for saying that, Grace replied, genuinely touched by his unexpected humility. I appreciate your honesty. After Whitfield departed, Nathan gave her an impressed look. That was gracious of you. Many would have responded with justified resentment. Grace shrugged slightly. Forgiveness isn't about denying hurt or injustice. It's about refusing to be defined by it or to perpetuate its effects. A theological perspective? Yes, but also a practical one, Grace replied. Holding on to resentment would only bind me to past injuries. Moving forward requires releasing it. Their conversation was interrupted by Jonathan Reynolds, who approached with a formal envelope. Miss Sullivan, I wanted to deliver this personally, he said, handing it to her. The board has approved my recommendation for a permanent position as Director of Cultural and Religious Affairs for the Excelsior Hotel Group. The details are all there, including compensation that reflects your qualifications and experience. Grace accepted the envelope with surprise. I'm honored, Mr. Reynolds. This is unexpected. The symposium has demonstrated both your expertise and the value of having someone with your specific knowledge on our staff, Reynolds explained. We've already received inquiries about hosting similar events at our other properties. I understand you have other offers to consider, but I hope you'll give ours serious thought. After Reynolds left them, Grace opened the envelope. Her eyes widened at the salary figure, more than 5 times what she'd earned in housekeeping. Impressive offer? Nathan asked, noting her expression. Very, Grace confirmed, and there's something appealing about transforming the very institution where I was overlooked for so long. Poetic justice, Nathan agreed. Though I suspect your motivation runs deeper than vindication, Grace nodded. It's an opportunity to ensure others don't face the same barriers I did. Reynolds is implementing new hiring practices and professional development programs. I could help shape those changes. Creating systemic reform rather than simply escaping personal injustice, Nathan observed. That reflects both practical wisdom and ethical principle. The symposium's final day coincided with Sunday, and Grace attended morning mass before the closing session. Father Thomas had traveled to Washington to see her presentation and joined her at St. Matthew's Cathedral. I'm so proud of you, Grace, he said as they exited the church, not just for your professional success, but for how you've handled this sudden change in circumstances. It's been overwhelming, Grace admitted. I keep wondering why God allowed 6 years of struggle before this breakthrough. Perhaps those years were preparation, not punishment, Father Thomas suggested. You developed patience, humility, and compassion through your experiences. Those qualities, combined with your intellect, make you especially effective now. I've been offered several positions, Grace told him, describing each opportunity. All worthy paths, Father Thomas replied. Have you prayed about the decision? Constantly, Grace smiled, but I haven't received a thunderbolt of clarity. Father Thomas chuckled. God rarely works through thunderbolts. More often, he guides through the quiet voice of wisdom and the circumstances he arranges. Which opportunity gives you the greatest chance to use all your gifts, not just your intellect, but your compassion and faith as well? It was that question that echoed in Grace's mind throughout the symposium's closing session. As diplomats and scholars exchanged final handshakes and business cards, she found herself watching the hotel staff, the servers refilling water glasses, the housekeepers discreetly maintaining the conference rooms, the concierge assisting with travel arrangements. Each person had a story, talents, dreams beyond their current roles. How many were like her, their potential unrecognized? The thought crystallized her decision. She found Reynolds as the event concluded. "I'd like to accept your offer," she told him, "with one condition." "Which is?" he asked, intrigued. "I want to help develop a comprehensive talent identification program across all hotel properties. Many employees have skills and education that could benefit the company if properly recognized." Reynolds smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. We've already begun auditing our HR practices. Your perspective would be invaluable in reshaping our approach." That evening, Grace met Nathan for dinner at a small restaurant near the hotel. The diplomat had become a friend through their shared experience of the symposium. "So you've decided to stay at the Excelsior," he said when she told him her decision. "I confess I'm pleased, both professionally and personally. Our diplomatic initiative will benefit from your continued involvement." "And I'll benefit from your perspective," Grace replied. "Your approach to building bridges across different belief systems is something I admire." "Even though I don't share your faith?" Nathan asked with a slight smile. "Especially because of that difference," Grace answered honestly. "You help me see beyond my own framework, which makes my thinking more rigorous." "An unexpected benefit of diversity," Nathan observed. "Speaking of which, I understand your first project is developing a talent recognition program." Grace nodded enthusiastically. "We're creating assessment tools that look beyond traditional credentials to identify valuable skills among existing staff. Language proficiency, problem-solving abilities, interpersonal intelligence, qualities that may not appear on formal resumes but significantly impact service quality. Turning your personal experience into institutional change," Nathan said approvingly. "That's how lasting reform happens." "It's only a beginning," Grace acknowledged. "Changing systems is harder than changing individual circumstances. But it's necessary work if we want to create truly just institutions." 2 months later, Grace stood in the Excelsior Grand's lobby, the same space where she had once polished brass fixtures while feeling invisible. Now she was conducting a training session for department managers on recognizing and developing talent within their teams. "Our pilot program has already identified 27 employees with advanced degrees or specialized skills relevant to hotel operations," she explained to the assembled managers. "Many were hired for entry-level positions during economic downturns and never had the opportunity to advance, despite their qualifications." She gestured to a young man standing beside her. "David Nguyen worked in our maintenance department for 4 years. No one knew he has a master's in electrical engineering until our new assessment process. He's now heading our energy efficiency initiative, which has already reduced costs by 15%. David smiled shyly as the managers applauded. "I never thought anyone would ask about my background," he admitted. "I was grateful just to have a job during the recession." "That's precisely the mindset we need to change," Grace continued. "Every employee deserves to be seen as a whole person with unique gifts and potential, not just as their current job title." After the session, Grace returned to her office to find Nathan waiting. The diplomat had become a regular visitor as they collaborated on the Cultural Heritage Protection Initiative. "Impressive presentation," he commented. "Your program is gaining attention beyond the hotel industry." The The State Department's Human Resources Director called me this morning, interested in adapting your assessment tools for diplomatic staff. That's unexpected, Grace replied, pleased. Though the principles should transfer to any organization. Indeed, Nathan agreed. Which brings me to another matter. The Cultural Heritage Initiative has received formal approval and funding. We'll be establishing offices here in Washington and at several international locations. I'd like you to consider joining the project full-time as Cultural Affairs Director. Grace looked at him in surprise. But my work here is just beginning to show results. The hotel program is already well established, Nathan pointed out. The systems you've created will continue without your daily involvement. This new role would allow you to expand your impact globally, protecting historical and religious sites in conflict zones while building cross-cultural understanding. It sounds fascinating, Grace admitted, and challenging. Both, Nathan confirmed, will be working with diverse stakeholders, governments, religious authorities, local communities, often in contentious circumstances. Your unique combination of academic knowledge, faith perspective, and practical diplomacy would be invaluable. May I have some time to consider it? Of course, Nathan replied. We won't begin formal operations for another month. That evening, Grace sought guidance through prayer and reflection. The opportunity Nathan offered aligned perfectly with her expertise and values, yet she felt a responsibility to the hotel program she had initiated. As she contemplated her decision, she remembered something Father Thomas had often told her during her years of professional disappointment. God's timing is rarely our timing, but it's always purposeful. Sometimes the delays we resent are actually preparation for opportunities we cannot yet imagine. Those 6 years as a housekeeper had taught her patience, humility, and empathy for those overlooked by systems of power. Without that experience, would she have recognized the hidden talents of others or understood how to create institutional change? Would she have developed the resilience needed for international diplomacy in challenging contexts? Grace realized that her unexpected journey, from classical scholar to hotel maid to cultural director, had equipped her with a unique perspective that neither academic credentials alone nor diplomatic training could provide. Each stage, even those that seemed like detours, had been essential preparation. The next morning, she called Nathan to accept his offer. 6 months later, Grace stood amid ancient ruins in a war-torn region, negotiating with local authorities for the protection of historical texts threatened by ongoing conflict. Beside her, Nathan engaged with government officials while she spoke with religious leaders, building the trust necessary for effective preservation efforts. Their work had already saved irreplaceable manuscripts and artifacts in 3 countries, while creating dialogue between communities divided by centuries of misunderstanding. Grace's ability to speak both the language of academia and the language of faith had proven essential to their success. As they returned to their temporary headquarters that evening, Nathan remarked, "It's remarkable how your specific combination of knowledge and experience prepared you for this role. If you hadn't been discovered answering that Latin call in the hotel lobby, none of this might have happened." Grace smiled thoughtfully. "I used to question why God allowed me to study ancient languages only to work as a hotel maid for 6 years. Now I see how every part of that journey prepared me for this work. The academic knowledge, yes, but also the humility and persistence developed through difficulty. A purposeful pattern rather than random circumstances," Nathan suggested. "Yes," Grace confirmed, "though I respect that you might see it differently." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I've always approached life through rational analysis rather than faith," he said finally. "But working with you has challenged my thinking. I've observed how your faith provides not just comfort, but a framework for interpreting experience that gives meaning to both success and suffering." "It's more than interpretation," Grace replied gently. "It's relationship with God and with others. That relationship shapes how I understand my purpose and responsibility." "A purpose evident in your work," Nathan acknowledged. Whatever its source, your perspective has proven invaluable to our mission. As the sun set over ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of human conflict and cooperation, Grace reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From cleaning hotel rooms to preserving humanity's cultural heritage, from feeling invisible to helping others be truly seen. What had begun with a simple phone call answered in Latin had become a life transformed. Not just for her personally, but for the many others whose gifts were now recognized through the programs she had helped create. She thought of Esther and David, and countless others at the Excelsior whose talents were now being developed rather than overlooked. She thought of the communities benefiting from their heritage preservation work, where ancient wisdom was being protected for future generations. The path had not been what she expected when she completed her master's degree with such high hopes. It had included detours of disappointment and valleys of doubt, yet each step, even those that seemed meaningless at the time, had led to this moment of purpose and fulfillment. As she and Nathan walked back toward their headquarters, Grace offered a silent prayer of gratitude, not just for the professional recognition that had finally come, but for the wisdom gained through waiting, the compassion developed through suffering, and the opportunity to create systems where others would not have to struggle as she had. Her greatest satisfaction wasn't in her personal vindication, but in the doors now opening for others whose gifts might otherwise have remained hidden behind mops and cleaning carts. True justice wasn't just about individual success, but about transforming systems to recognize the inherent value and potential in every person. And it had all begun because a hotel maid answered a call in Latin and someone important had been listening.